reach,
inspire,
and transform. NASM Optima 2021 Virtual Conference.
our biggest and best Optima yet.
3 full days of learning.
More than 100 virtual sessions.
Inspiring speakers you can't miss.
Challenging workouts to master your skills.
Nutrition and lifestyle facts.
The best community network.
And for the first time ever, with free full online access.
At Optima 2021.
Find out more and register today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Random Fit. I am Wendy Batts, and I am here with my friend, colleague, and co-host, Mr. Ken Miller. Ken, how are you?
I'm great, Wendy. You're looking good, dapper as always.
Oh, why, thanks. I love this hour just because, you make me feel so good for a whole hour. Plus, we get to talk about all kinds of topics that I thoroughly enjoy, with today being about the foot and ankle complex. And I know this topic came up from a couple of emails that we received, as well as I think one of your clients, Ken, was asking a little bit about the foot and ankle, and we're like, you know what better topic than this today? So yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about the foot and ankle? Besides, we walk on it and we use it pretty much daily.
You're gonna use that foot and ankle. So the thing about it is, Wendy, and again, we did another segment on another body part, but when I brought it up to my client and we're talking about their goals, and they're like, is that why, and then the conversation goes down a little rabbit hole when it comes to all the things that, let's say, something like a simple ankle sprain can lead to for the rest of the body. So I just remember, when I was in high school, when it comes to the foot and ankle, that was one of those things where I kept spraining it. Like, I'd play basketball, then I'd sprain it. It'd turn nice, pretty blue and purple colors. And then as soon as it'd heal up again, I'd play basketball again. Not that I was good or anything. And then next thing you know, I sprained it again. And this was a cycle. And this is basically why, I don't play basketball. I didn't play it competitively, recreationally, yes. But that's why I migrated towards wrestling, because there's not a whole lot of change of direction. But when we're talking about the foot and ankle, it made so much sense once I started learning about, how injuries come to happen and why people repeat the same injury. So with the foot and ankle, here's the thing. The foot is such a dynamic piece of anatomy when you have all the bones and tendons and ligaments that cross the foot itself, but also up into the lower leg or up into the calf area. So that's just a reflection of what it does when you're walking, because when you walk and you get that heel strike, right, or just like right in front of the front part of the heel, that hits the ground, your foot not rolls out, but as you go through your stance phase, and that's when your foot is rolling from heel to toe, its job as far as absorbing that impact on the ground to where now your body is swinging over it. You're going through what they call a stance phase. That's when you're going from your heel and stepping onto more of the ball of your foot and onto the toe. The roll changes from, accommodating the ground that's under it, because it has to mold to the surface below it, into this firm platform from where you're going to push off and drive into that next step. So because the foot has such a dynamic role and that's a very simplified explanation of what the foot does, Wendy. So it changes roles, and because it does so much, you're asking a lot of it. But here's the thing. You have a small foot, small ankle, and then you have a big calf, right? And then you have a bigger hip above it, and then you have a bigger torso above it. So you're asking that foot and ankle to do a lot, which the slightest bit of, I guess, weakness or lack of mobility can show itself really quick. That weakness, the sooner you ask a high demand activity like change of direction, that's when you're putting yourself at risk for injury. And that's, again, training through injury is what we're going to talk about today. So just because we've sprained an ankle, have some kind of foot issue like plantar fasciitis, which comes up, it happens so often, but a lot of people stop their workouts because of it, but it comes up so frequently. What are we supposed to do, right? Just stop working out altogether. Don't do legs.
Well, two things. Biggest comment is if you kept re-spraining and spraining your ankle during basketball, probably a good thing that you shut it down,
Yeah.
or that maybe you re-listen back to this podcast, because obviously there was something that went majorly wrong.
Right.
But, when you think about one of the best, predictors of future injuries is past injuries. And I think that's really important to think about. So if you know that you are prone to high sprains, or you've rolled your ankle, and unfortunately I've done that off of a curb. I can't say I was doing anything that was even high performance, like playing a game. I literally did it off of a curb because I was in a hurry, wasn't paying attention, didn't have my foot in the proper place, and just rolled it. And it was super painful. But, I think one of the things when we talk about ankles, and I know even dealing with professional athletes, one of the major things that you can do is, first of all, do an assessment, or try to see if somebody can do an assessment, and see, when you squat down without your shoes on, what do your feet do? Because I think a big thing is if you notice that your arches, like you have arches when you're looking at your foot, just looking at it, and it's not in contact with the ground. So if your legs are crossed or whatever, but then as soon as you stand up, all of a sudden you have flat feet. That is a huge indicator that you've got a lot of weak muscles in the arch of your foot, which will lead to other injuries up the entire body long term because of that, like those small muscles in your feet. And so, like doing things like crunching a towel with your toes, like trying to get some strength back into just those muscles that make your arch. Or the big one, Ken, balance training, that no one likes to do, that it's one of those overrated things, which in my true feelings about that is it's very underutilized, because people think it's a waste of time, when in all reality it can help you prevent injuries. It can help you when you get older. There's so many positives when you think about balance training. But you need to see, do you have the arch? Does it disappear? And that's a number one indicator of why people sometimes have that pain in the bottom of their feet that lead to the plantar fasciitis, which you talked about, along with another plethora of injuries or discomfort that you have in that lower region.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that they estimate about 2 million ankle sprains a year, right? That's all. It's only 2 million. Now, I don't know if that's like 2 million different people, or if it's the same person that's spraining the right ankle once or twice, or the right and the left ankle, right? So, you could technically chalk me up for a couple of those every once in a while. But to your point, Wendy, it is one of those things where, when I get a high school kid or even a junior high kid, and I'm going over their health and medical history, and we're talking about, okay, what's wrong? And of course, they're going to bring up things like, yeah, I hurt my hip or my shoulder. They think of the major stuff. But one of the things that goes underreported, or they look at it like, oh, this is an everyday thing. Ankle sprains is one of those things. So that when I ask them specifically about ankle sprains, or ankle issues, I don't want to just keep them honed in on one specific injury, but that's one of those that, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you know what, that's right, I sprained my ankle last week. It's like, you forgot about something that you just did last week. But that's how commonplace it is. It's like they don't chalk it up as an injury, but more or less just an occurrence that's just, to be expected. So again, you're here listening to Random Fit, and we are talking about training through injury regarding the foot and the ankle. So, and I know you've got a million of those examples, Wendy, but especially, and a lot of people don't realize too, that, when you're playing soccer, right? Or American football, when you're in a position where you are in a really secured situation, like, so what I mean by that is, like, you're wearing cleats, it's a hard sole shoe, you're wearing basketball shoes, which if you've got the higher supports, you're not giving the foot and ankle a whole lot of ability to move. So you're actually kind of casting it, and especially if you're one of those that gets your foot and ankle taped up, you're not allowing the foot and ankle to express itself. But I understand it's a way to prevent the injury, but in trying to prevent the injury, you're not you're not doing your foot and ankle any favors as far as giving it the capacity.
That's exactly right. And when we talk about, when you say express yourself, of course, what comes to mind is the Madonna song, Express Yourself, which is probably super not appropriate right now. However, you make some really good points, Ken. And I think, what we keep talking about, we want the ankle to move. And unfortunately, it's one of those joints that gets super over, like the muscles around that joint get super overactive and then limit its ability to move into what we call dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, which is like pointing, or flexing your foot, pointing your foot. If you don't have approximately 20 degrees, which who knows if you do without having some measurement tool such as a goniometer to figure that out, then what you end up doing, if you want to just see for yourself, is, put one foot straight ahead up against a wall and then move it 2 inches back and then try to bend your knee and see if your knee can touch the wall. If it can't, without, your foot turning out or you having to lean or your heel coming off the ground, then you're probably super overactive in those muscles that allow that joint to move freely, like Ken was saying, expressing the joint or moving it the way that it was supposed to move. And so, you're going to think that without that ideal range of motion, that's when we start to have these ankle sprain injuries that happen, either, contact, non-contact, something happens where, we end up having that particular injury and it reoccurs over and over, like we discussed. Or when we talked about that plantar fasciitis, when you're thinking about that, that's just basically an inflammation, an irritated plantar fascia, which is basically the tissue that's underneath the foot that can be very painful. And most people notice that when you wake up in the morning, when they first put their foot down, all of a sudden they feel like this shooting pain in the bottom of their foot. And, it can just be from prolonged standing. It can be just because, like I said, when the arches fall, it's a lot of stress that's on those, the little muscles that make up the arch. And so we've got to start thinking that, okay, we really want to get the foot back into its optimal alignment. We want to be able to strengthen the muscles. We want to work on the arch. We want to make sure that we're moving, because without that, like the decreased plantar flexor and the Achilles tendon, if we don't have that moving correctly, it can affect everything else, which I mentioned earlier. So think about this. If you are lacking the motion and you're having some issues at the foot and ankle, it can actually affect what's happening at the hip, because a lot of times it will decrease the activation of the small muscles that stabilize the hip, as well as your glutes. And we've always talked about, trying to get those glutes to start to fire and do what it's supposed to do, because, there's one thing that we want to do is we want to try to realign our bodies back. So therefore we don't have these injuries and we don't have these pain and discomfort. So, obviously if we hear the word itis, someone's got tendinitis, they've got some kind of itis, that's inflammation. Those are issues in specific areas that are just really unhappy. And so maybe you need to take some time off. But if you've had these issues and then now you're trying to, work through them, and that it's safe, and you've had a medical advisor tell you like, listen, you're okay to start working, but you need to strengthen your foot and ankle. We are going to talk to you about what you can do for that. But you have to then be aware of the common compensations. So look at your foot, try that knee thing against the wall. If your knee touches the wall, then usually that means there's weakness of the muscles that surround the joint. It's not really overactivity of a muscle that's putting it out of its joint. It's underactivity that's allowing that compensation to occur. So at that point, we would really focus in a lot on the strengthening of that joint. But you also want to think that if you can't, it's being restricted. And so you want to do things like, doing a foam rolling type activity, maybe on the outer calf or the calf complex itself. Or even on the side of like not the knee joint, but like there's a small muscle called the short head of the bicep femoris. Maybe you want to spend some time rolling or using one of those percussion devices to see if you can try to, try to relax that one area that may be restricting that. But then you're going to have to do like the complete opposite, and you're going to have to strengthen those muscles that allow that compensation to occur. And so maybe some examples of that would be turning your toes in slightly, keeping your hips straight, but then coming up onto, your big toe and really trying to focus in on strengthening the inside of your calves, really going back and thinking about strengthening your glutes. Because like I said, sometimes, When you don't have really good, motion in that ankle, it can decrease activation in the small muscles of your hips and as well as the glutes. So doing bridges, doing lateral tube walks. I mean, those types of things. Ken, I know that you can go on and on about this, but I would think when people talk about plantar fasciitis, the first thing they want to do is really stretch out the tissue underneath the arches of your feet, when in all reality, that can actually increase some of the soreness and pain and discomfort. When you want to think about, okay, why is it so painful? And it's usually because things aren't firing correctly, allowing for proper movement, especially if it's got to hold your body weight. So those of you guys that are just joining us, we're talking about training through injury with the foot and ankle. I'm Wendy Batts. I'm here with Ken. And Ken, I don't know if you want to jump in and kind of talk, again, I was trying to cover some of that plantar fasciitis, and it's so hard to really identify what that is other than there's pain in the bottom of my foot. And talk, obviously going through some things on a corrective standpoint, what we can do for that. But, maybe if you want to kind of take us through the Achilles tendinopathy, that's also something you hear very often. First of all, what is it?
Yeah, I guess to put it simply, when we talk about Achilles tendinopathy, or what used to be called primarily Achilles tendonitis, just inflammation of or irritation of the Achilles tendon. So just to talk a little bit about anatomy and why we can go into the calf, and as you mentioned, Wendy, the short head of the biceps femoris, is that there is some tightness, there's some overactivity or mobility restrictions in the ankle complex. And what contributes to that is having a calf that doesn't like to extend or get length, and when the calf is quote unquote tight, the ankle doesn't move well, right? And so if you're just trying to stretch and then think, with every step you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you. So
you and that, and I just talked about Madonna and expressing yourself. I mean, apparently, we are
the
quite a
80s song
musical
reference
team.
is strong today. Strong. All right. So even if, and here's the thing, sometimes it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, right? But a lot of times it's the areas above it that can be the criminals in this case. So if the calf is tight or restricted in movement, then that's going to affect how not just the ankle, but also the foot moves. So because now the calf, connects to the heel bone via the Achilles tendon, and if the calf is tight, therefore there's going to be a little restriction, and you're going to ask the Achilles tendon to do a lot of work when it comes to trying to fit the bill, when it comes to the extension that you're trying to get, or the dorsiflexion that you're trying to get from the ankle. So you're asking a lot of an area that's only able to give a little, and that can over time put a lot of stress on that area. So it could be, you're immobile, like what we talked about, you're in a fixed soled shoe, so your foot doesn't have a lot of opportunity to move. And you talked about, the foot arch collapsing. So you also have to talk about the foot arch coming up. So you're talking about the basic movement of pronation and supination. So if the foot can't do that, then the foot's going to turn out, or you're going to be limited in your motion, which is going to just put a lot of stress on the soft tissues of the foot. And that's what's going to lead to the irritation, when you're asking the foot and ankle to do more than what it's capable of doing. And the Achilles is just one of the areas that's subject to that, especially if you're running up hills, hiking. Like I had just had a session this morning, and they were telling me, man, my ankles are really tight. Well, tell me what you did. Well, I went on a 3-mile hike through the woods, and now my foot and ankle are bothering me. Did you warm up? Did you do any movement prep? Did you get yourself ready for it? Like, no, it's just a hike. Well, guess what? When you're climbing, you're asking that foot and ankle to do a lot.
And that kind of brings up a good point too, because one joint that often when we think about the foot and ankle, we're just thinking about the foot and the ankle. But to me, and especially in my profession of the people that I work with the most, one of the most important joints is your big toe. And if you don't have proper
Yeah.
range of motion of your big toe, which is going to propel you forward, then it also, causes breakdown in the foot, in the arches, as well as, all the way up through the foot and ankle and everywhere else. And so, these are little things that we take for granted that sometimes we kind of want to make sure that we tell you guys like, hey, stretch out your toes, stretch out your feet, really focus on strengthening, the muscles of your foot and ankle, like I said, with balance. But it's not just about balance. I don't care if you can stand on a foot, because anybody can stand on a foot. It's, can you stand on a foot and try to hold up your arches? And for those of you guys that have weak arches of your feet, and you notice that your foot falls, the arches fall, one of the first questions I hear is, well, if it's already weak and it's going to fall, how do you want, I can't just hold it up. And that's really a good point. What you'll have to do is actually kind of dig that big toe in and make an arch. And if you start to feel that burning sensation on the bottom of your feet, that's actually good, because it's an indication that you're actually working muscles. And, when I go and work out, I try to lift heavy. And if my quads are burning to where I almost want to throw up, I'm like, oh, fantastic, I did something well. However, if somebody feels that same burning sensation at the bottom of their foot, they think that like something is way wrong. And so just know that, you need to start to focus and work on the weak muscles that are causing some of these compensations, or you're going to continue to have these pains and aches and issues long term.
Right. And I think the other side of that coin, Wendy, is that if we're talking about the foot and supporting it through a stronger through stronger, say that 10 times fast, through
I don't even know what you're saying.
Foot arch control.
There we go.
That's what happens when you try to string 2-syllable words together. But the hip has a lot to do with that as well. So don't be surprised, for those of you that are going to try to do some balance exercises, that when you are standing on that single leg for 30 to 45 seconds while you do a single leg balance exercise, or even just standing on your one leg while you're trying to do some upper body work, even, that don't be surprised if you start to feel a little activation, maybe even a little burning through your hip as well. And that just shows you that your foot and ankle are closely related to the hip, right? So you have to kind of start to put these pieces together. I know we're talking about foot and ankle right now, but if the foot and ankle isn't working well, there's a strong chance the hip isn't working well as well. So you have to look at, strengthening both, because when you have a glute complex that's weak, that's going to make it harder for the foot to do its job. So you kind of have to address a couple things. And by us just talking about the foot and ankle and just strengthening the foot and ankle, we're only covering just part of the big picture when it comes to, making yourself more injury proof or more resilient when it comes to physical activity, and addressing or staving off excess stress, whether it's Achilles tendinopathy, plantar fasciitis, or even the more common ankle sprain.
Well, and I know this is a big complaint, Ken, and I know like that I hear from my clients. And so because you're using your words so gracefully today. I've had clients come to me and they get shin splints. Very common shin splints, and usually they're walking uphill, they're doing stuff, their feet are turning out, they didn't do a proper warm up. So if you've got somebody that comes in, and starts with this complaint, what is it that you say to your clients most often, and how do you work through that?
Well, it's again, a couple things that go into that. One, we already talked about the calf, and you talked about foam rolling and doing some static stretching to get more extensibility through the back of the leg. Now, the next step that has to follow that is strengthening those muscles in the front of the leg, right? So your shin, your anterior tibialis mainly, is the muscle that's responsible for getting the toe up. And it's when you have, let's say, when you're looking at somebody totally, what does their overhead squat movement assessment tell them, right? Are their feet turning out? Are their knees coming in? Like you mentioned, Wendy, the foot arch collapsing, but is this person also has leaning too far forward, and then there's a lot of stress coming into that lower leg. So when that foot and ankle are tight through the backside, that oftentimes means that you're weak on the front side. So strengthening winds up being a big part of that. And I have clients, as you do, Wendy, that if we don't get that strengthening part of the doing their corrective exercise, their ankle feels better just by the flexibility alone, but it doesn't feel as good as when they do the strengthening part on top of that.
I agree. And, one of the biggest indicators, and people are like, well, what do I do to work through all this? Well, first of all, we've got to identify what this is and, what's causing it. And to your point, Ken, having some kind of evaluation, or even just doing that self-eval. Look at your arches. If they fall, do balance exercises. If you notice that when you squat down that your feet are slightly turning out, do what Ken just said, foam roll your calves, really focus on, activating the inside of your calf complex. If you start to feel that you've got, again, the shin splints, focus on strengthening lengthening your calves and strengthening the front of your shin by just doing things like a banded toe up, meaning that you put a band around the front of your foot, and then you just, with your leg extended, just bringing your toes straight up towards your shin. Doing that slow and controlled movements, like you said, on a corrective standpoint, can really help all of all of these things that you're feeling. And so, I could talk about this for days, and I know you could too, but hopefully we've kind of given you a little few nuggets to think about, that if you are struggling within the foot and ankle complex, what can you do to try to help fix it? Roll it, strengthen it, and don't forget to work the big house, work the glutes. All about the butt. I'm always coming back to the tush. I don't know. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, session of Random Fit. If you want to be a part of more and more of our podcast, please subscribe, join us anywhere you download podcasts. Please be sure to subscribe, and we try to provide any kind of topics that you want to hear about. So feel free to contact us directly, and we will be sure to get one on for you. But with that, I would like to say thanks for joining us. And until next time, be well.